Hello! So, I have maybe a bit less to talk about this week than usual, I think. A lot happened during Rhythm of War Part 4, but a lot of it, I think, is not something I really have a lot to talk about. It was mostly just big events happening, not a lot to analyze, in my opinion. So I'm going to stick to a couple of main things. So let's start with Shallan. So we get several important revelations about Shallan here. First of all, we find out that Formless isn't real. I like that. I really like that. I like the fact that Formless was never actually a new personality. It was just Shallan trying to get away from her sense of guilt by pretending to be someone and convincing herself that she is someone who wouldn't feel guilty. Like, she actively tried to become a worse person in order to assuage her guilt, which is kind of interesting because it's like the opposite of the approach that Dalinar took, which I really like. I like the fact that we're seeing like these very different coping mechanisms, and I also like that she wasn't saved from this darkness externally. It wasn't Adolin who convinced her that she's a good person. It was Vale, a part of herself, one of her own personalities, that sort of pulled her back from the brink. The fact that she didn't kill Kalak is a bit disappointing for me, just because I was kind of hoping to see Shallan fully join the Ghost Bloods. I just feel like that would have made for a very interesting direction for her story. But I'm sure wherever this version of Shallan ends up going will also be interesting. Nothing Shallan has done so far in this series has been boring. I can always count on Shallan to be the most interesting character, so I'm not exactly concerned. I am very bummed out by the death, quote-unquote, of Vale, though. I really, really liked Vale, and I really liked the dynamic of Shallan, Vale, and Radiant interacting, and I'm gonna be very sad to see that dynamic go. I feel like it was very entertaining, and while obviously Shallan had to come to terms with her own memories and her own trauma and all that, I do kind of wish that all the personalities had stayed, but just, without being unhealthy coping mechanisms, but with being actual just personalities. But I guess that's not what Brandon wanted to do, so that's fine. I'm not saying it's like an actively bad decision. It's just I think it made it more interesting to read about Shallan having the three personalities interact, and I kind of liked their dynamic, and I thought it was a pretty cute dynamic that honestly worked. Like, I don't think this was like a problem that Shallan had to deal with. Obviously, there were a lot of problems she has to deal with, but the fact that Vale and Radiant exist in and of itself, I think, was never a problem. And I kind of wish that it had stayed that way. But that's no use crying over spilled milk, I guess. Of course, I'm sort of avoiding talking about the big thing with Shallan here, which is the reveal that she used to have a second, or rather a first, Nahel bond with a different cryptic when she was a child. This sort of changes a lot of things. This begs several questions, actually. First of all, how did Shallan have a shard blade this whole time? I'm assuming that the shard blade she was summoning before she fully bonded Pattern was that original cryptic. She was essentially summoning a Deadeye in the form of a shard blade. But then why did it take her less than 10 seconds? Because it was established that she didn't need 10 seconds. Or was Pattern already had her bond with Pattern already reached a point where he could become a Shardblade by the time we saw her kill Tin? Like, by that point, was that already Pattern in Shardblade form and not this other cryptic? I'm not sure. That's something that I'm gonna need some explanations for going forward. The other thing is that this massively recontextualizes Pattern's, like, the fact that Pattern is convinced that Shallan is going to kill him and is, like, constantly saying how, oh, it's okay, I know you'll kill me one day, but it's fine. Which is not something Syl ever says to Kaladin, and I always thought that was just, like, cryptics being extra scared or something, but no. It's because she's literally done it before. And Pattern bonded her with the knowledge that she's done it. He took a much larger risk than most other Radiant Spren do in bonding their Radiants. Because he bonded someone who already has a track record of killing their Spren. I am extremely curious to read the next Shallan chapter and hear her talk with Pattern about this, because I feel like there's a lot between those two need to talk about right now. That's about all I have to say about Shallan for now, though. The other thing that happens in Shadesmar is, of course, Adolin's trial, and the major reveal of Maya at the end. So, Maya saves Adolin's life by doing the whole you cannot have my sacrifice thing, which is very reminiscent of Dalinar's you cannot have my pain last book. I'm sure that's a purposeful parallel, but it does also reveal some interesting stuff about the Recreants. So the Recreants was something that was done with the consent of the Radiant Spren, but they didn't think they were going to die. This has some interesting implications. So this either means that before the Recreants, no Knight Radiant had ever broken their bond before, and therefore the Spren didn't know what happens to Spren whose bonds are broken, which I don't think that's true. That doesn't seem right. It feels highly unlikely that for the thousands of years that the Knights Radiant existed, none of them ever broke their oaths. The other thing that makes me think it might be possible, that makes me think, God, I'm bad at talking today. The other thing I think might have happened is that whatever the Recreants was, like whatever the Spren and their knights actually did, they didn't think that it constituted a breaking of their oaths. Like, they did something without expecting that to lead to their oaths being broken, maybe? That's the other thing that occurs to me. Because Maya says that she expected pain, but not death from what they did. Of course, we do get several hints in this section mostly from Kalak himself in the epigraphs, that whatever the Recreants was, it wasn't just a case of the Knights Radiant being afraid of their own powers like we suspected. It was actually something to do with sealing away Ba'ado Mishram. Maybe. I think. Or at least that happened at the same time? It's a bit unclear, but something to do with Ba'ado Mishram definitely went down during the Recreants. And Kalak believes that it's imperative that Ba'ado Mishram be released because she's an integral part of Roshar or something. I am really curious to see where that's going, because I still think, I have a strong suspicion that Ba'ado Mishram is currently being slowly digested by Chiri Chiri. So we'll see how that goes. Chiri Chiri is developing like almost human level intelligence though, so maybe Chiri Chiri is fusing with Ba'ado Mishram? Maybe? Or I could be completely wrong and Honor's drop and the King's drop are not in fact the same gem. But I feel like they probably are. And I feel like that's what Chiri Chiri ate. Anyway, yeah, the whole scene with Maya was really emotionally powerful. I really like the scene, and I'm kind of horrified at imagining what it must have felt like for Maya to make this incredibly difficult sacrifice together with what I assume was a close friend of hers, her Knight Radiant, only to then go the next 3,000 years hearing people constantly call her friend a monster for doing that to her when it was consensual. Yeah, that's gotta be rough. I can see why she's mad about it. I am wondering what this means about Deadeye's Pren. If Maya could be... Like, Maya hasn't been undead-eyed. Her eyes are still scratched out, but she appears to have gotten her mind back? I'm curious about... There's a lot of stuff about the mechanics of how Deadeyes are created and what they actually are that we don't know yet, clearly. I'm wondering if Shallan could maybe rehabilitate the cryptic that she killed. Anyway, that's about all for the Shadesmar crew. Meanwhile, in Urithiru, very little happens with Kaladin. He just gets healed by Lift. Not much to say there. Navani has some major breakthroughs and also has like a moment of almost romantic tension with Raboniel, which was interesting. But she has this very interesting and complex relationship with Raboniel, where they have this huge amount of respect for each other as researchers and scholars and scientists, but also Raboniel is a horrible monster. And I do like the fact that the cliche version that I was worried about of Raboniel's motivations was subverted. Like, I was concerned that it would be revealed that Raboniel actually just wants to save her daughter. And that's all she cares about, and everything she's been doing was actually about helping her daughter. And briefly, it seemed like that would be the case. She kills her daughter, releasing her from her torment, and she's like, oh, finally I've accomplished my goal. And for a moment I was like, that's kind of lame. Like, I don't like that twist. I don't like the idea that Raboniel was just Mr. Freeze all along. But then she goes, anyway, killing my daughter was actually just a test run. I'm now going to commit multiple genocides. Which isn't good, obviously, but is, in my opinion, a very good narrative choice. I do like the fact that that this sort of tropey thing that I was worried about was actually somewhat comically subverted, in my opinion. What the hell was that? Sorry, I breathed out and a napkin flew in front of the camera. Apparently I breathe out very aggressively. So yeah, I did like that, and I do find some of the conversations between Navani and Raboniel and some of Navani's experiments very interesting, because of course, Navani is delving into some weirdly mathematical stuff now. This is the most scientific that one of Brandon's magic systems has gotten. We are literally talking about math now. Which is interesting, because for a long time, the magic system on Roshar seemed like a bit less precise, a bit less science-based than the one on Scadrial, for example. or even the one on Nalthis. But really the reason for that is that the characters themselves knew less about it, and so they spoke of it in more mystical terms. And now that the characters are learning more about the magic system, they are also starting to treat it in a more scientific way, which I like. I like that little, I like that twist, that they're not still treating it as this, like, mythical religious thing, because they're now able to scientifically measure it. I am curious what the relevance of Warlight and all these other results of Navani's experiments is going to be. Obviously, the whole anti-light formula thing that she develops at the end could potentially be a very powerful weapon for either side. And also a way to permanently kill a fused, which is very exciting. That's a big deal for this story, because so far that has not been an option. But even if they don't permanently kill them, they now have a means to trap them, because they now know how. Now we know that there are these daggers made of, by the way, racium. Really? I know we're just following the naming scheme of atium and laracium, but like, really, Brandon, racium? Do all 16 shards just have a metal for some reason that's named after them? Very, very silly in my opinion. I mean, the naming scheme, not the idea that they all have a metal, but the naming scheme is very silly in my opinion. But we also get a confirmation that the sand is from Taldane, like I suspected. What else happens in this whole Navani-Raboniel interaction? I don't think much, really. It's a very interesting interaction to read, and Navani seems to finally be coming to terms with the fact that she is, in fact, an incredibly gifted scholar. It's kind of funny that what it took for Navani to learn to respect herself is praise from a 7,000-year-old genocidal maniac. But, you know, to each their own. Some people need unique forms of pushing to get to a place of mental health, I guess. Yeah, that's all I have to say about Navani. Let's talk about Venli now. So, Venli, one thing I really like about Venli is that she still sucks. Like, she's going through a somewhat redemption-y arc, but she is still a coward. She still is largely selfish and prioritizes her own needs, and she's changed enough that she can look at herself and see that this is bad. Like, she has a thought or an impulse or does something, and mentally she's like, oh, that was a terrible thing to do. See, I'm still a coward, or see, I'm still a terrible person. But that's not enough to actually stop her from doing those things, or from having those thoughts. And she's fighting against it. It's sort of an interesting, like, I guess, opposite of what's going on with Shallan. Like, Shallan is a good person who did a bunch of bad stuff, and so now she's trying to turn herself into a worse person so that she feels less bad about the bad stuff she did. Like, she's trying to become the sort of person who wouldn't feel bad about the stuff she did. Whereas Venli is someone who's done terrible things and was a terrible person, and the way she's trying to become better is by essentially actively turning herself into a person who will be ashamed and horrified at the stuff she's done. And she's struggling with that, because sometimes she is and sometimes she isn't. And this was extremely poorly phrased on my part. But I hope what I'm trying to say was clear. What I'm saying is I really like Venli's arc. so far, and I'm really curious where it's going. I'm guessing that she's going to still somehow help the Radiants and everyone else and not just run away. Like, I'm guessing she's going to have her major breakthrough and maybe say her first oath at the end of this book. But I'm not sure. It's possible that she's going to have a few more steps back before she has a step forward. It's possible that she is just going to run in this book. Is there anything else character-wise I want to talk about here? Dabbid. Dabbid! So we get the major reveal that Dabbid has had some kind of developmental issue, I guess, his whole life. And that as a result, he's been faking being mute most of this time in order to prevent the members of Bridge 4 from realizing his developmental issue. I did not expect to get, like, a bunch of character development on Dabbid. Certainly did not expect a secret backstory from him. But there it is. I don't know if he's right about the idea that he will be healed if he gets a hell bond, though. We have it on good authority that stuff you're born with can't be healed by Stormlight. Actually, no. That's not true. He will be healed, never mind. Stuff you're born with cannot be healed by regrowth. Like, cannot be healed by someone else using regrowth on you. It very much can be healed by you yourself having access to Stormlight, as evidenced by the Reshi King. So yeah, I guess I was wrong. No, Dabbid will be healed when he gets access to Stormlight, never mind. That won't, however... See, the issue is, even if whatever the cause of his developmental issue is healed, it won't heal the fact that he has gone all this time with a developmental disorder of some kind. Like, it says that he learned to speak at 6, so he clearly, had a very stunted development mentally. And the effects of having gone through that stunted development probably can't be healed. They have to be dealt with. We'll see how major of a character Dabbid becomes going forward. I think he might become a major character because he's getting sudden development right now. Either that or he's going to die in this book. Like, when a character suddenly gets a burst of character development in a book, it either means they're going to become a member of the major cast, or they're getting that development so you feel sadder when they die. I'm hoping it's the former. The latter would be kind of cheap, but you never know. Also, let's talk about some plot stuff now. So we are definitely going to see some kind of split between race and odium, I think. Race, whatever, and odium. Because we now have a lot of people, I believe here it was Syaanat referencing it, and earlier we had Sazed. A lot of people are insisting and reminding, well, other characters, but also us, the readers, that the shard and its vessel are separate. Meaning that even if you defeat the vessel, the shard might still be a threat. So what I think is going to happen at some point, I think probably at the end of book 5, because that's like the end of the first major arc of Stormlight from what I've gathered. I'm guessing at the end of book 5, Race is going to be killed, but the shard of odium is then going to be unleashed, quote unquote, and cause havoc. that's sort of, or be taken up by someone else or something like that. That's my theory right now, is that while Odium is the major antagonist of the Stormlight Archive, I do not think we are going to end up with Race as the major antagonist, if that makes sense. The other thing that's interesting here is Sia Anat says to Teravangian, "Good luck, human, when Odium does come for you. You are not protected from him as many on this world are. You have made deals that exempt you from such safety." This confirms something I've suspected for a while now, which is that even with the return having happened, Odium cannot directly physically influence the world. He has to act through intermediaries. And this is really evidenced by the fact that he hasn't just destroyed humanity, because we know from the examples of ruin and preservation in Mistborn that a shard can directly physically influence reality when it's not being held back by anything in some incredibly destructive and powerful ways. And that makes me think that Odium could do a lot more if he wasn't, as Sianat says here, limited by some protections. I'm guessing that these protections are either a remnant of the Oath Pact itself, or perhaps some kind of agreement between the three shards that binds all three of them. Because I have noticed that none of the three shards seem willing or able to directly influence events. Like, they all seem to mostly influence events through agents, and even Cultivation, who really has done the most directly in that she literally gives magical boons to people, I think she's only able to do that when they agree. Because note here that that Fianat says, "You have made deals that exempt you from such safety." I think there might be some kind of deal between the three shards that they can't directly use their powers to physically impact reality unless someone agrees to it. But when someone agrees to be influenced by one of the shards, they also open themselves up to the other two. At least that's how I'm interpreting what happened here. Like, when Teravangian made a deal with Cultivation, he also made himself susceptible to direct influence from Odium. Which is interesting because it implies that Dalinar and Lift are in similar danger. Which makes me wonder, why hasn't Odium tried to just, like, directly harm Dalinar? I mean, he did at the end of the last book, but even then he had to act through Ner'ghaul. Like, he had Ner'ghaul try to possess Dalinar, I believe. At least I think that's what happened there. I don't think Odium himself could directly, with his own self, influence Dalinar. Yeah, that's something to think about going forward. Anyway, so yeah, I don't know where the story is going. I'm assuming that now that the trial in Shadesmar is done, I'm guessing that the big climax at the end of this is going to be Dalinar's attempt to liberate Urithiru, which he's going to do maybe with Ishar's help. We still haven't seen him actually reach Ishar or talk to him, so who knows how that's gonna go. Maybe Ishar is not gonna be willing to help. We have very mixed reviews of Ishar, by the way. Like some people say that Ishar is completely insane, and his actions seem to indicate that. But Nail seems utterly convinced that Ishar is, like, the only sane herald. I'm very excited to see Ishar for myself, which I'm hoping is going to happen very soon, possibly even in the next Dalinar chapter. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say here. Oh wait, I actually do have a couple of more things to say. So first of all, I think R'lain might be gay. R'lain has, like, a weird line here, where he says that he cannot imagine mating with Venli to continue the listener race, which on its own is totally fine. Of course he can. Like, why? Of course, that would be a weird reason to have sex with someone anyway, and it would be super uncomfortable, and I wouldn't be comfortable doing it. But then he says that, I don't have it written here, but he says something along the lines of, oh, whenever he's taken mate form in the past, the results were strange and unexpected to both him and other listeners. So, like, is he gay or something like that? Is he trans? There's something gender sexuality going on with Relate, which I'm very excited about. I'm very excited to see if I'm right about that. That would make both of the canonically queer characters bridge 4, which is kind of funny. Kaladin's just gathering together a pride parade. Which, I mean, queer people do flock to each other. That's the basis of, like, half of my friendships with other people. So, it's not unrealistic. What else do I want to talk about? Right, I want to talk about Ulim and Axindweth. So I'm becoming increasingly convinced that Axindweth is not working for Odium, that she is some kind of external agent from someone off-world, maybe Thydakar or someone like that. I'm just getting the feeling that this whole thing, this desolation, the return of the fused and of Odium and the Everstorm and all that, I'm getting the feeling that while of course Odium played an active role in it, I also feel like someone else from outside the Rosharan system helped push this process along for motives that don't necessarily align with Odium's. At least that's the vibe I'm getting. I'm getting the feeling that there were external factors that led to the desolation. Because after all, we don't know what triggered the desolation. The obvious answer is the Everstorm. But, like, why did Taln return? Taln returned months before the Everstorm. And as far as I can tell, he didn't break under torture, so that's not why he returned? I don't know. I'm trying to figure out what the inciting incident for the return was. Like, what was the moment at which things started happening that led to the return of the Knights Radiant, the Talon returning, the appearance of the Everstorm, all of that. I feel like we're still missing that. We're missing why all this is happening now. And I get this weird suspicion that I can't corroborate with evidence yet, that we're going to find out that this was all caused by someone who is not native to Roshar and whose motives are only temporarily aligned with Odium's. And I think that Axindweth is going to be critical for that. Axindweth, by the way, I feel like I know that name from somewhere. And I cannot remember from where, but it sounds like a Terrace name to me. I feel like Axindweth might be a Terrace woman, based on just the name. Once I finish the book and can safely look things up, I'm going to look up if Axindweth was a name that was mentioned in any earlier books, because it really, really rings a bell to me. And also it really, really strongly is associated with Terrace in my head. We'll see. That I think is actually all I have to say here. I will be back soon enough to talk about whatever the hell happens in part 5. I am extremely unprepared for what is coming, I think, because I cannot even begin to predict how this is all going to play out. Okay. See you next week then. This was fun.